I played guitar, all my life, but there's no way that I played guitar as a tour de force like I did in Led Zeppelin.
By the early 1980s, Jimmy Page had scaled the summit of rock and roll and gazed down upon the world from a throne built on feedback, fretwork, and mythology. For 12 years, Led Zeppelin had been more than a band. They had been an elemental force, rewriting the rules of arena rock while cultivating an aura that straddled the divine and the dangerous. Page, the band's sonic architect and chief sorcerer, wielded his guitar like a wand, conjuring riffs that crackled with menace and mystery. And then, quite suddenly, it all stopped. When Led Zeppelin disbanded in 1980 following the death of drummer John Bonham, the silence that followed was more than musical. It was existential. Page, long the shadowy mastermind behind Zeppelin's staggering noise, withdrew from the public eye. There were murmurs of studio tinkering, the release of a dark and moody soundtrack for Death Wish 2, but nothing resembling a comeback. So when he stepped back onto the stage in 1983 for a series of benefit concerts in support of his old friend Ronnie Lane, it was not the triumphal return of a rock god, it was something far more human. As Page himself would later confess, "I got pretty nervous about it. These were not the nerves of a novice, but of a man unsure of who he was, without the band that had defined him." This is the story of how Jimmy Page, reluctant and uncertain, reclaimed his place on stage. Not with the thunder of Led Zeppelin, but with the quiet courage of someone learning to walk again. The end of Led Zeppelin was not a conventional breakup. It was not creative differences, nor declining sales. It was tragedy.
John Bonham, drummer with the British rock group Led Zeppelin since its inception in 1968, was found dead today at the home of a friend in Windsor, England.
On the 25th of September 1980, John Bonham died following a day of heavy drinking at Page's Windsor home. The surviving members were devastated. On the 4th of December that year, they issued a succinct statement. "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." Page, never loquacious in public, became a near-spectral presence in the music world. His reputation, already approaching the mythical, was frozen in amber. He briefly resurfaced in 1982 with the release of the Death Wish 2 soundtrack, an eerie, largely instrumental affair that nodded to Zeppelin's darker atmospheres while exploring jazz and ambient textures. But it was hardly the stuff of chart-storming returns. The guitarist appeared to be a man not so much in exile as in mourning. It was Ronnie Lane, former bassist of the Small Faces and Faces, who offered Page a reason to return to the stage. By the early 80s, Lane had been battling multiple sclerosis for several years, and in 1983 he spearheaded the organisation of a benefit concert to raise funds for research into the disease. The event would take place at the Royal Albert Hall, and the initial lineup read like a who's who of British rock: Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Steve Winwood, Bill Wyman, Charlie Watts, and, crucially, Jimmy Page. Page didn't hesitate. "I volunteered straight away when Stu, Lane's nickname, asked me to do it," he later recalled. "Everybody who met Ronnie Lane loved him. It was leave your egos outside, so everybody just came together to do everything they could for this thing at the Royal Albert Hall." The first ARMS concert, Action into Research for Multiple Sclerosis, took place on the 20th of September 1983, and it was nothing short of historic. Not only did it mark Page's return to performing live, it was also the first time the three Yardbirds guitar alumni, Clapton, Beck, and Page, shared a stage together. The atmosphere was electric, the crowd both reverent and ecstatic. Prince Charles and Princess Diana were in attendance, adding a touch of royal glamour to an already legendary evening. And yet, for Page, the performance came with its own quiet burden. While Clapton and Beck both had extensive solo catalogues to draw from, Page faced a unique dilemma. "I realized that everyone involved had solo careers. I didn't," he said. "I only had a career via the Yardbirds and Led Zeppelin, and I'd just done the Death Wish soundtrack, so I just did stuff from that." This confession is revealing. For all his success and technical mastery, Page had never sought the spotlight in the same way as his peers. Zeppelin had always been greater than the sum of its parts, a collective force rather than a platform for individual showmanship. Page had no Layla, no hi-ho silver lining. What he had were textures, arrangements, moods. It's what made him a master producer, but it left him naked on stage without a band. To fill the gap, Page brought along Paul Rodgers, the powerhouse vocalist from Free and Bad Company. Together they performed a mix of Death Wish 2 material and new songs that would eventually form the nucleus of their mid-80s project The Firm.
It took an awful lot of trouble just to make me understand.
Their set included Boogie Mama, Who's to Blame, City Sirens, and an instrumental version of Stairway to Heaven, a bold move considering the song's almost sacred place in rock history. Still, Page's return was met with acclaim. His playing was fluid and expressive, and while it lacked the grandeur of his Zeppelin days, it carried a kind of emotional candor that surprised many. "It's a bit odd," he said of being back on stage, "but it was really great to be out there and playing again." The Albert Hall show had been intended as a one-off, but the reaction was so positive that plans were quickly drawn up for an American tour. And here the scale changed dramatically. The ARMS US tour included dates in cities like New York, San Francisco, and Dallas. The venues were larger, the logistics more complex, the stakes higher. For Page, the contrast was stark. The Albert Hall, where they had the initial concerts, was like an old friend, he recalled, but when we went to America, we played in the Reunion Arena in Dallas. I thought, that's going to be good, because we'd played it with Led Zeppelin. But when I went on there for the soundcheck, it was absolutely huge, vast, and I got pretty nervous about it. This admission is striking. Page, who had commanded Madison Square Garden and Nebworth with apparent ease, now found himself cowed by the scale of a venue he'd conquered before. But the difference, of course, was the context. There was no Bonham, no Plant, no Page's black dragon suit or violin bow theatrics, just a man with a guitar and a recently cobbled together set list. And yet, despite his nerves, Page delivered. The US audiences were not expecting Zeppelin Redux. They were there to witness a one-of-a-kind collaboration between old friends. And in that spirit, Page's performances were received with warmth and appreciation. One of the most compelling aspects of the ARMS tour was the interplay between Clapton, Beck, and Page. The three men had emerged from the crucible of 60s British blues, each forging his own path. Clapton, the blues purist turned pop rock mainstay. Beck, the restless innovator. Page, the alchemist of hard rock. On stage together, they avoided the trap of one-upmanship. Instead, they shared solos, exchanged smiles, and played with a generosity that belied their superstar status. The finale often saw all three on stage for extended jam sessions, an orgy of tone, technique, and mutual admiration. For fans, it was a dream. For Page, it was restorative. There was something really special about it, he said years later. Not just the music, but the atmosphere. Everyone just dropped their egos. We were there for Ronnie. What makes Page's performances during the ARMS tour so compelling is the blend of vulnerability and resolve. This was not a man chasing relevance, nor cashing in on past glories. This was a man stepping into the unknown for a cause he believed in. Ronnie Lane, whose condition had been steadily worsening, remained the emotional heart of the project. Though he performed only briefly during the shows, sometimes joining in with vocals or harmonica, his presence was felt throughout. The concerts raised both money and awareness for multiple sclerosis research and laid the groundwork for similar benefit gigs that would follow in the 80s, including Live Aid and Farm Aid. Page's contribution wasn't merely musical, it was symbolic. In confronting his post-Zeppelin anxiety, he demonstrated that courage in music doesn't always come in the form of high notes or pyrotechnics. Sometimes it comes in the form of simply showing up. The Arms Tour proved to be a turning point for Page. It reignited his desire to perform and collaborate. The chemistry he discovered with Paul Rodgers led to the formation of The Firm, whose debut album would arrive in 1985. Though that band never scaled the heights of Zeppelin or Bad Company, it kept Page creatively engaged throughout the decade. In 1988, he released his first true solo album, Outrider, a patchy but often inspired collection that included contributions from Plant and Jason Bonham. A year later, he and Plant reunited for a short set at the Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary concert, a moment that would eventually lead to their unleaded project in the 1990s. But in many ways, the Arms concerts remain the spiritual hinge between Zeppelin's legacy and Page's future. They allowed him to perform again, not as a legend, but as a man. It is tempting to measure Jimmy Page's career in epic gestures. The 27-minute versions of Dazed and Confused, the Boeing 720 emblazoned with Led Zeppelin, the colossal roar of the 1973 Madison Square Garden shows. But the Arms concerts remind us that even the most mythic figures are susceptible to doubt. In Dallas, at the vast and cavernous Reunion Arena, Jimmy Page faced not a crowd, but himself. And what he found there was not ego, but courage. "I got pretty nervous about it," he said. And then he played.
Jimmy Page!